So now that we've got the housekeeping out of the way, we're going to start the discussion. But first, I'm going to introduce who our panelists are today. We have PJ Moynihan, who is the founder and CEO of Digital Eyes Film Productions and the director producer of Healing Voices. We have Lynn Cunningham, who is the co-director, co-producer of Medicating Normal. Angela Peacock, who is a MSW and former Army Sergeant. You just saw her in the film Medicating Normal. And Oryx Cohen, who is a survivor, a speaker, filmmaker, and subject of the film Healing Voices that you all saw via the link that you were sent. So I'm going to now pass the floor to each panelist, let them introduce themselves a little bit further. And while the panelists are introducing themselves, the audience can please feel free to use the Q&A box to pose questions. You can pose questions about filmmaking, about the films themselves, about using filmmaking as activism during the pandemic, which was the topic of this panel discussion. As long as it's relevant to either film, please feel free to ask questions of the panel. So PJ, would you like to start introducing yourself?
Sure, thanks, Nicole. So my name is PJ Moynihan. My company is Digital Eyes Film. We've been producing documentaries for going on about 20 years at this point. And Healing Voices is a project that I'm sort of very proud of, and that sort of my, I sort of feel like represents the best of the work that we are capable of doing. And I just want to commend the Medicating Normal team for an incredible production, great story, well told, important story, and has so much crossover with our film. I'm looking forward to seeing where this discussion takes us today.
Lynn?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn Cunningham, co-director, co-producer of Medicating Normal. I just want to thank Healing Voices for existing, PJ and Oryx for joining us today. It's really exciting. We all, four of us, chuckled yesterday about how, we're brothers and sisters or first cousins. Our films feel so important together, and so with such overlap, and yet have different emphases. And anyway, we thank you guys for all being here, because the audience, you guys are a really big part of this. Because I'm asked this all the time, I just want to quickly explain how Medicating Normal came into being. It began really as a personal quest to help a beloved struggling family member who in her early mid-20s was going through a mental health crisis. At the time she had graduated, she was a stellar athlete, scholar, graduated from one of the competitive universities in our country, and was on her way to becoming a great writer. And she still is a great writer, but she was on a sort of upward moving career path. And this all happened, and our family was completely confounded, scared. She had been experiencing altered states, great depression, and we did not know what to do. And we turned to who we thought were the very, very best doctors on the East Coast. And pretty quickly she was diagnosed with a severe mental illness, and we were told that it would be okay. She'd be on medication for life, and that it was due to a chemical imbalance, and that it would stabilize her and everything would be okay. And fast forward 10 years, she is okay, but calling me up every day, Lenny, is everything going to be okay? Not happy, in anguish, I would say, would be the word. And every day, and I would, because our family loves her and we would never let anything happen to her, I would always reassure her until I realized she was not asking me about her material well-being, rather her her potential to become the person that that I think she wanted to become. And so I realized, one medication had become 10. She was on disability, and she really wasn't, she was doing a little bit of writing, but nothing compared to what she had been doing. So I knew then, when that sort of epiphany is like, oh my gosh, she's not talking about, am I going to be okay materially? What is she putting into her body? What is she taking? What are these drugs, and what are they supposed to be doing for her? And so that led on the research, really, a good long, I joined with my filmmaking partner, Wendy, and together we began with Robert Whitaker's Anatomy of an Epidemic. He is in both films. He is a humble, awesome, he's a journalist, and he did scrupulous research in his book that many people in both films read. I know Angie read it. Many of the people in our film read the book. No one knew they were all reading it, but this book is a must read. And this process of educating ourselves about the world of mental health and treatment was such a wonderful odyssey and an eye-opener that we realized, oh my God, this is something that most Americans, unless they have someone close to them or unless they're experiencing some of this on their own, it's an untold story. So we found our subjects, our wonderful subjects, who courageously lived, 4 or 5 years with us as we filmed. We interviewed scores of experts, many of whom corroborated what we were beginning to put together as a pattern. We talked to hundreds of psychiatric drug consumers who all in various ways also added to the story. So what we ended up with was Medicating Normal, and we're very happy to show it. But what we really want is dialogue about it. And hopefully today is an example of what we're going to get after the film. Thank you so much.
Okay, Oryx.
All right, thanks, Lynn and Nicole. I'm Oryx Cohen. I am one of the co-producers with PJ of Healing Voices. I'm also a subject in the film, so if you haven't had a chance to watch it, you can look forward to seeing me in the film. My day job, I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the National Empowerment Center, which is a national peer-run mental health organization. So, like PJ, very grateful to be a part of this, and I just loved it when I first saw Medicating Normal. Angie, I feel like you are a sister. we basically have the same roles in these movies, and even with the rolling out of the movies, being involved with the whole process. So I too am very much looking forward to the discussion and seeing what questions the audience has as well.
And I'll go last just to speed it up. Thank you. Yeah, me and Oryx are very similar in what's happened and what we're doing now. I'm 5 years off all medications. I still suffer with some pretty severe neurological problems, balance problems, social problems, all kinds of stuff. I'm still trying to unravel that belief system that there's something wrong with me, that I have a disorder, that I'll have to take meds for the rest of my life. All those things are still feel like they're cellular or something, and I'm trying to take them off like a dirty coat or something. So I've been helping with the outreach of the film. I'm excited about this discussion in particular because we've never really talked about it like as a means of activism and like the grassroots level. So I'm happy to talk about that today instead of more of like the mental health stuff, because we've done 137 screenings and I've been on a panel for probably more than 100. So I talk about this a lot. I still keep some of my story to myself because I want to keep some of it sacred. But anyway, I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, everybody. So Lynn, since you sort of already shared the inspiration behind Medicating Normal, PJ, would you like to share a bit about your inspiration for your film?
Gladly. we've told this story a number of times at this point, and you'll hear later more about how we rolled Healing Voices out in terms of the distribution side. So I warned the Medicating Normal crew yesterday. This question's a wormhole that sometimes I struggle to not go down too far. So in the interest of time and for the audience, I'll try and keep it brief. But the short story is that I met Oryx through a mutual friend. And I had been making documentaries for 6 or 7 years at that point. When I learned about the work that Oryx was doing through an organization that he and a man named Will Hall started called the Freedom Center, they were identifying themselves as survivors of psychiatry. And that was such a foreign concept. I mean, mental health is very much it's in front of us in the news and in the media we consume. And I had never been exposed to that idea. And to me, that idea represented this notion that not only had people seeking help not been helped by the very system they reached out to, but they had actually, in fact, been harmed by that system. And so I personally felt as a filmmaker that I was sort of privy to this story that not a lot of people knew about. And for the first time in my professional life, I felt sort of a duty I felt an obligation to help to bridge this story into the sort of the general public through this medium that I believe is very powerful, which is documentary film. And so, that really began sort of a personal journey for myself, but also a friendship with Oryx and, a years-long process like many of these independent films are, from concept to casting to fundraising to production and all that falls in between, to make this film that we're very, very proud of, that we feel has made a real impact in the world, and that has sort of, in fact, done what we set out to do, which was deliver a counter narrative to this mainstream narrative that, mental illness, in quotation, in air quotes, is it means that people are broken and that their lives are irreconcilable and that medication is this crutch that they need to use forevermore. And so, we're really proud to be telling a story that pushes back on that and that has gotten out there in a way that wasn't just about sending people into a movie theater or onto Netflix to watch a documentary. That part of what we're going to talk about later is that, we framed this as a social action initiative, and that the action was people coming together, watching this movie and in the film, creating an opening to have new conversations about mental health and about how we respond to it and even think about it and talk about it. So that's the genesis. And Oryx, you have anything to add about the origin story?
It was, the only thing I would add is that in doing this work for several years before we met, with the Freedom Center, we would see that this approach that we were taking, this peer support approach, we were supporting each other more than psychiatrists supporting us to wean off psych drugs, if that was a person's choice. We had people who were taking psych drugs, people who weren't taking psych drugs in the group. But we would see these amazing transformations in people's lives, people who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, people who had been on the back wards of psychiatric hospitals, written off and returning to their communities and starting to volunteer and become leaders with the Freedom Center and start living their lives, getting married, having jobs. And yet that narrative was not out there in the public at all. It was, if you have a diagnosis of schizophrenia, your life is over, basically. You're just going to get worse and worse and worse and then eventually die. And that's just not what we were seeing with each other, with ourselves, with people that we came across. So we felt like we needed to have another narrative out there in terms of what's actually happening and what potentially can happen if people are treated the right way, in our opinion. So that was really the inspiration for Healing Voices, and I think that comes through in the movie by following our stories is a hopeful message.
Okay, thank you both so much. Oryx, you said in your introduction that you feel like a sistership sort of with Angie. So both of you, could you talk about what it's been like being so public about your stories? Why did you want to be a part of the film or agree to be a part of films that you're in? And how did your participation in the film move you into continued activism?
Want me to go first? I guess I'll go first. Okay, so my origin story with the film is that I saw the ads. Lynn and Wendy had put up an ad that just said, we want to hear your story. Please email us at this address. And I just ignored it because I was in a few documentaries before this for more like wounded warriors, veterans, female veterans, stories like that. So I was like, no, I already been in a documentary. I don't want to do that again. Plus, I was suffering so immensely. I could not imagine having a camera watch the suffering, So long story short, the filmmaker emailed me and said, I heard your story is a pretty deep one. Can you please talk to me about it? And I shared like this much. I barely told her anything. And then she said, well, I want to call you on the phone. She called me on the phone. I told her a little bit more. And then she said, well, I want to come out and talk to you in person. So she flew to St. Louis and we went for a walk. I could barely walk. I was in such heavy withdrawal. I was extremely suicidal. I had what would be known as psychosis, extreme states. I couldn't barely walk. I was like, I gotta go. We need to go. I need to go back home now. It was that bad. So I drove her back to her hotel. She basically just kind of wore me down. I don't know how to say it any other way. And then when I remember when she closed the door after I dropped her off at the hotel, I remember thinking, okay, well, now I can't like kill myself. I have to stay alive till they come back to film me. So in a bittersweet kind of way, it did keep me going in that immense suffering. When you have nobody that believes you, that there's no pill that's going to fix how you feel, that like, this is not even a thing. Like nobody even knows this is a thing. So your family doesn't believe you. If you have cancer, people deliver meals to your door. When you are in psychiatric drug withdrawal, all your friends leave. Your doctor doesn't believe you. There's no place to go. So they were kind of like a support team almost, and I would tell them things like the couch scene at the beginning. I remember that was the first time I said out loud, like what exactly was going on in my head. And they were like, the camera turned off and they all just looked at me and said, Angie, we've heard that story over and over and over again. And that was just so validating to me, to tell me that and that immense suffering. But anyway, so that was my role of getting into the film and then being in it and seeing it. I didn't see it for the first time until July 2019. And my reaction to it, like within 20 minutes of watching it and in an audience with everybody else, I was like, holy shit. I was like texting my friends, like, you guys, this is going to be big. Oh my God, this is like blowing the water out, But then that scene where you see me at UCLA and I'm talking to the students and I say, in 13 years, not one doctor or therapist or anybody said it could be your meds. That scene, I just jumped up out of the chair. I ran out of the theater. I was crying so hard. I ran to the filmmaker's arms. I said, what did they do to me? It just hit me like really hard, like what had happened. And then I don't know, after that, just on a whim, I was graduating college. I went to college through this using audiobooks, barely able to talk. Like, I don't even know how I did that. But anyway, I was graduating college. My lease was up. And I really had wanted to do that RV living thing. So I was like, hey guys, if I do like an RV tour of the United States with the film, like, will you support me in that? Like, can we pull this off? And they were like, let's do it. We're not going to they're not going to pay for the whole thing, but like the campsite, the night of a screening or the dinner, the meal that day, if you make the schedule, we can pull it off. So I started touring the United States. I drove from Missouri to California, did screenings in Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, California. And then the morning of our UCLA screening that was supposed to be March 12th, they closed UCLA. The pandemic pulled the plug on our grassroots organizing. So we did about 75 in-person screenings. Most of them were me by myself with audiences or panels that I could pull together. And I just thought, the last thought is I just thought, like Oryx and PJ will say in a minute, it was just a magical thing that was happening. Like we were witnessing a room full of people all on a level playing field. They all watched the same material. There would be a prescriber, a therapist, someone in active withdrawal, someone 5 years off, and they would all be having this dialogue. And I was like, this is huge. Like, this is almost another movie. Like, these people are like coming to terms with like, oh my God, maybe that's what happened to my niece, or that's what happened to my marriage. Like, all these people are making connections and thinking like, yeah, why am I on Effexor for 30 years? That doesn't make sense, you know? So anyway, it's just been, I could talk about this for hours and hours. It's just been an immensely gratifying, validating. It gives me something to do when I still feel like shit, you know, it's a good distraction. It's helping me get back into the workforce because I've been on disability for 15 years. Like this totally ruined my life. I know I look normal and I sound normal, but I was considered seriously mentally ill. I have boxes and boxes of medical records. Nobody ever thought I would be anything but like what Orc said on the back, you know, 7 hospitalizations, 45 psych drugs. I'm a miracle, honestly. And anyway, okay.
Wow, thanks. So my origin story is we already talked about it a little bit. We decided early on to be partners on this, and thank you, PJ, for that. So we started out as partners. I feel like we're more like brothers now, friends and colleagues. So that's how that kind of worked. But a more interesting story maybe is how I became a subject in the film, because originally I was going to be more of a talking head type, like here's someone who's, you know, got his shit together, you know, made a recovery, he's representing the movement, the consumer survivor movement. And it's interesting, in planning this film, I was pushing a lot for, let's find someone who is actively going through something, and so then we can, you know, document how they get through it. Maybe they start taking meds, and then maybe they decide to go off the meds, and they're going through a crisis, and let's see what that's like. That would be powerful to show. Lo and behold, we found lots of people going through crisis and not a one who was willing to have that on camera, believe it or not. I think you could probably believe that. So what ended up happening is, through the course of the 5 years of filming, I ended up going through a big thing. So it kind of became like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, you want to document this? Then you make that decision yourself. And it was a very hard decision to make. And PJ and the team were very respectful about that decision. Should we even be filming this when you're going through something? So if you haven't watched Healing Voices, it documents a very tough time in my life. And as far as when the movie came out, how did I feel? Terrified. Terrified, because it was very, very vulnerable time of my life and for my family during the filming of this. Lots of friends and colleagues impacted by what I went through. So I was terrified to see what people's reactions were going to be. But the more that we showed the film all over the world, I just had people coming up to me and like thanking me for being vulnerable and putting myself out there. So the more that we showed it, the more used to it I got, and the more I started to enjoy it, and it became probably the most important thing that I've done in my work, I would say, is this film.
Thank you both. So we've touched a little bit on sort of the, you know, Angie talked some about the Medicating Normal screenings and what she witnessed there with the audience. So Lynn or PJ, do you guys have anything else to add about the impact that your, I guess, grassroots distribution model had in community screenings?
I definitely feel, Angie described about how we started out in person, and then because of COVID, we had to go virtual. And that was a really interesting bridge, because believe it or not, there were some positive things about having to go virtual. One is that we could span in a more affordable way a larger geographic area. We could be in Norway, we could be in the UK, we could be in a very different way. We missed a huge dimension of our audience, who I believe every film is made so much better because of its audience. And what Angie described is people, sharing, courageously sharing their personal experiences, made it in many ways, the event itself became more interesting than our film. So, and that happened before COVID, that happened 50 times. We had something better even than we thought our film was, because of the audience participation. So, but then we went in the COVID phase, when we really did have to just become virtual, and we would have panels just like this, we could go to different areas of the world. And I keep thinking into places we could never have gone because we wouldn't have had the money to fly there and all that. So there are some benefits. And also, as Angie and I have talked about a lot, we wanted to, because these events in person were so amazing and so earth-changing because of the different people who were participating in a dialogue where they normally don't, a doctor hearing from someone who is a patient, but there they are in a film screening together, equal. We wanted to film them. I mean, what Angie says is true. We wanted to make a film about what was happening, but we felt if we brought the camera into these experiences, the grassroots in-person screening, it would shut them down because people wouldn't have the feeling of safety to air their thoughts. There was the camera. So we did not film those. And yet on the panel, on these virtual panels, as you can see, we are recording this. We think these panel discussions are really important, but they allow a little bit more privacy for our audience members to air their questions and their things. So again, that issue of in activism, filming the response is really important, but you have to be careful. Anyway, that's a PJ. I don't know how you guys did that.
Great, and I'll just add one thing. All of our panels are recorded and put on our YouTube channel. So if you want to watch panels all over the world from experts of all kinds on so many different topics, go over to our YouTube channel. Just search for Medicating Normal on YouTube. Okay, shameless plug.
No shame in the shameless plug. So what I will say is, at this point, Healing Voices is on Amazon Prime, and it's sort of, our run with this thing was sort of is a little bit in the rearview mirror. Though, part of my hope is as I continue to create content along similar lines, it'll also drive audiences back to Healing Voices as a part of my body of work. But all of our experience on the grassroots side of this was pre-COVID. So I'm sure there are some people here that do know the backstory of Healing Voices, but the thrust of it is that we did the typical stuff. We finished the film and we submitted to our first deadline was for a Sundance submission. That was we got to get the film done by such and such a date to get it into Sundance. And we submitted to all the major festivals and ended up doing some festivals and all that. But I think pretty quickly we made an internal decision as a producing team that we knew, number one, there were groups and organizations all over the world, from South Australia to New York City to the West Coast of the US to China, that were doing this work, that were trying to get people in their local and regional areas to think differently about mental health. And we believe that was our core audience, were these these folks that were leading a charge sort of locally, regionally, to get a certain message out there. And so our thought was, why don't we just deliver the film to those people as our affiliates, right? That if what we've produced as a documentary is in fact a social tool, it's a tool for those people. It's a tool for people to say, come to a screening, watch something that might make you think a little bit differently, and let's have a discussion about it. So what Oryx and I spent about a good 6 or 8 months doing was a very aggressive direct sales effort, where we databased and reached out over email or phone or DMs or whatever to groups and organizations all over the world. And we organized a grassroots release for the film. This is in the spring of 2016, where over the course of about, we tried to initially do it on one date, and that logistically that wasn't going to happen. So it ended up being over the course of a couple of weeks. So late April, early May of 2016, the film screened in over 130 sites in 8 countries. And there were, in excess of 50,000 people that attended these screenings, and they were all organized by local partners. And so we provide them with, the license to show the film, the poster, the press release, the, a bit of sort of technical support around what to do, what not to do with these events, how to frame the panel discussion. But, in terms of the spirit of what we were doing, if this is a social action initiative, our belief was that the action was the event, that the action was bringing people together in community, putting this thing up on the screen, letting people sort of absorb it any which way, and then opening it up to dialogue, and doing that with some safety, and sort of a non-judgmental approach. It's not about saying this is the way you need to look at things. It's about saying here's something that, here's a way to look at this that you might not have been privy to before. And what we found, like Lynn had articulated with your experience, this was like the special sauce. This was where the magic happened. And we had people sharing things for the first time in front of an audience, things they had never shared before in the course of their entire lives. And maybe, changing the relationship to how they think about what's going on with their son or their daughter, or they're in their marriage, or what have you. And so we really, I think, set out to try and to create something that was a counter narrative, like I said, in order to give people permission to think about things differently. And I think that's what these events do, is they give people permission to have, maybe it validates for some people something they've been thinking or feeling for a long time, but haven't been able to really put into words. And so, so that was our initial release. And then the film sort of continued to screen on the Grassroots, with us driving the bus on that for upwards of a year before we released the film digitally for home video use. So that was our business model. That was our social action model. And we believe it had a real impact. And, for us, the evidence came anecdotally, just in terms of the feedback we got from our screening partners, our experience of being at these events personally. Oryx was probably in more of them than I was, just because he was able to, through his job at the National Empowerment Center, just be in a lot of these places at these conferences where the film was showing. So just to sort of summarize, I think that if you think about these documentaries as a social tool, which I believe that they are, and you put a framework around it, an activist framework around it, that they can make a measurable impact in a lot of ways. And so, I hope that when people, producers, directors are taking these projects on, they see more than just the net objective of getting a film onto Netflix, because there's way more value in the product than that ultimate goal. So, though it's nice to be on Netflix, let's say, So thank you for listening.
Yeah, and if I could just add a couple quick things. So when I talked about one of our original goals was to get this out to the public in terms of a different message. Now we estimate that over 1 million people have now seen Healing Voices, combined with the in-person screenings and Prime, and so most of these people are not the choir. Most of these people are members of the general public. So I'm really proud to say that we've accomplished our goal of getting a different message out there. And the second thing I'll say is that we're still going with Healing Voices as an inspiration. And one example is Healing Voices was the inspiration for us to organize a conference in South Australia. So if we just take a look at one place where the film has had an impact, I think the most impact has been in South Australia and the Adelaide region. We actually have someone joining the group from that region with us today. But they have screened the film multiple times. They've used it as an inspiration to start an alternative emergency room model. And we organized a conference there called Reawaken Australia, which was super powerful. If you have more questions, we can go more in depth, but I know we want to get to some other questions. But it was really kind of a utopian experience where we created a community that we want to see that included people with lived experience, professionals, family members, members of the community. And we actually created this wonderful, loving, supportive, connected community in a week. And it was amazing. I think a model really for the rest of the world. So thank you.
If I could just add one additional thought to that, Oryx, because I do think that Reawaken's a good example. I just want to commend the Medicating Normal team for like what a curveball to be in the midst of doing these events and then COVID. So kudos to you for adapting on the fly. And it's all, and also on the other side of this, and we talked about this yesterday in our preparation call, on the other side of all this isolation, I really think that what we were able to do with Healing Voices, I hope you can continue to do with your project. And I just think that people are going to be needing that connection and that coming together in those safe spaces more than ever before. So I think this is less about talking about filmmaking and activism during a pandemic, but hopefully what it could look like on the other side of it as well. So
I hereby vow to continue to drive the RV across the United States if I have to, because I loved it so much, and it really took the wind out of my sails, because I was so isolated from the withdrawal experience. I was trapped in my house for 2 years. I couldn't shower standing up for a year. You know what I'm saying? Like, and then I just finished my university, which was so hard to get through that with your brain just completely scrambled. And then I was like, oh my God, I'm going to see the world now. I'm going to experience people. I get to, reintegrate myself and learn what I like. And I get to see the country. So like, to be stopped on a dime, it really, I don't want to use medical language, but I definitely went into a dark place for a little while, but so virtual is not the same, but I promise to get back on the road when this stupid stuff is over.
Okay, so I'm gonna move into some of the audience questions, and we have a good one that I can kind of mesh with something I was gonna ask you guys next anyway. So someone who is a peer support specialist working for a nonprofit says, how do you introduce these films and conversations to people who are in the system, who are strongly advised, shamed, or even coerced to take meds? It feels radical to a lot of social workers and clinicians to challenge the medical model. So I sort of want to mesh that question with both films do challenge the current paradigm of mental health care and this narrative that, medications supposedly work for everyone. So what kind of pushback or hard questions did you guys get in your screenings as well when you introduced these controversial topics?
You want to go first? Or yeah, Lynn, you go. Lynn.
Well, I just want to say that that's a really, really important question that we had a lot in our editing. Are we making a film? And PJ's response about making it into a tool is a really interesting one. But are we making a film to convince the choir, as Orcs just pointed out, or are we making a film to convince people who have no idea about these issues? Both are important. So we elected to try to make a film that would not push so hard that it would push people away from the topic. And therefore we did not want to condemn all medication. We don't condemn all medication by a far cry, but we wanted to be very delicate in our condemnation of psych drugs across the board. Yet at the same time, we wanted to be truthful and tell a story that we thought was accurate and true. And it's really hard, because when you're making a film like this and you've met people like Orcs and Angie, and you are mad and you have a driving passion to do whatever it takes to get the film made so that the whole world can know their stories. But it's like you have to be very careful because you want people to not be shut down. So that was that I think was such a learning curve for us. At the beginning of our editing, we were mad and we had to contain that anger. Then so you were asking about, how do you get it in? Here's an anecdote that I think is just so unbelievable, is that we showed a rough cut of the film to a cross section of kind of very important psychiatrists, psychologists in the New York City area. I mean, muckety mucks. And it was a rough cut form. And It was in someone's living room and we turned it off and my heart was pounding. And I said, so what did you guys think? And one of the muckety mucks said, that was horrible. And I was like so upset. I said, but I held it in and I said, okay, that's fair. We are, it is a critical film. Why? And he said, well, you have 20 films here. How could you possibly make a film so simple? You have 20 films. And I said, this seemed like a divine inspiration to myself, but I said, just this question popped in my head and I said, well, okay, we totally acknowledge we have 20 films here. There were so many things we could have gone into. Which of those 20 films do you think we should have made if you think ours is so bad? And he said, and they all agreed in the room. Oh, the corruption issue. Oh, without a doubt, corruption, you know, all that big pharma, all the corruption, it's their fault. This was a group of mostly doctors and mental health providers pointing their fingers at a problem, but it's not the only problem. Anyway, I thought that was so interesting. And, but that screening was important because we needed to know what mainstream psychiatry, how they were going to react to us. So,
but Lynn, she always does this, guys. You have to tell the best part, the part that we love. Tell them.
Okay, the part that we love, which Angie always reminds me to tell, is that somehow in the same meeting, we showed, I forget how it came up, you might remember, but one of the critiques was that every single subject in our film was mentally ill, should have been on their meds, and oh, just you wait, Lynn, just you wait. You know, so-and-so's going to do this, so-and-so's going to do that, just wait. And my co-producer in the room with me at the time, Muffy, and we liked these people who we were showing the film to. I mean, they were decent human beings, and yet their take on one film was so different from what our take was. And the whole point of the film is that, anyway, so they did not feel that we had a healthy lineup of people to tell this story. Now, I don't know whether they would change their mind now, but the mainstream is going to be a hard nut to crack with both of our films.
But I want to say about our community screenings, we've had a little pushback, but it's not a lot. Mostly the form of pushback that we get is a couple, like maybe 2 people have said we were pill shamers. And when I asked them, like, what do you mean by that? Or can you explain? You know, it felt like things are, how do I explain this? Okay, so when something uncomfortable is presented to you, instead of saying, wow, I'm uncomfortable, something about that movie made me uncomfortable. It's like, no, I'm going to say that you're a pill shamer, or I'm going to say that this is dangerous, or I'm going to say that you're going to hurt people, or somebody's going to kill themselves. So it's like, I recognize that now that that's a form of cognitive dissonance, like you're hitting up against their uncomfortableness, but you can't talk about someone's uncomfortableness in front of an audience. Like you can't say, hi, I hear what you're saying. I know that you're scared about, you know, we don't want to ever pill shame people, but can you tell me about that feeling of discomfort? Because I don't want to be a therapist either, you know. But so I recognize that, but it's been very, I mean, few. I can name 5 people in, you know, 75 in-person screenings that did something like that. And we just like, let them have your experience. I'm not here to tell you to get off your meds. That is not my job. That's not what the film is about. You know, I recognize that people, I had one person, I'll never forget this. It was in, Advocacy in Framingham, Massachusetts. And she stood up and said, this is her language, not mine. I am diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. I've had so much trauma in my life. If I don't take my meds, I'll kill myself. And I was like, then, you know what I mean? Like I'm not anybody to say like, no. So that's been the only pushback. And then the other form is like me and Nicole work really, really, really hard. Nicole came on after I was exhausted because I was trying to get all the screenings and plan them all and rent a room and then get a panel together and then do all the marketing all by myself. And it was just like so much work. So Nicole came on after, and we email people. Each screening leads to another screening. We ask people in Australia, like, who do you know that wants to do a screening? Can you connect us to them? I'm on Twitter all the time trying to get, you know, connections. So every once in a while we'll get an email back like, this isn't with harm reduction principles. That's what we got. We got one of those. And I was like, yes, actually it is. Here's your harm reduction principles. You know, we get like, this is really great, but we're already having to convince our patients to take meds. So I don't want to present them with something that makes them question that, which really bothers me. And I get triggered every freaking time this happens. Like, no, like, you know, but we do get pushback. It's just not a lot. I think people are really hungry for this, and I've kind of given up on like systems change. Like I'd rather talk to audience members, people one-on-one, people that are in the system, people that are out of the system, people that are thinking about taking meds for the first time, teenagers. Like I'd rather talk to those people, because I really think the average consumer is pretty smart. They just might not have the tools to do their own investigation. So that's my take on the pushback. Oh, and wait, before I pass, somebody asked in the chat about the VA and veterans pushback. We've had a little bit of that. I had a panel with veterans recently, and there was a VA doctor that was helping with the planning, and he was strictly told by the VA that he's not allowed to be on the panel and not allowed to distribute it. That kind of bothered me. I have screened with vet centers only because I have friends that work there, which is a counseling service that's affiliated with the VA, but not like in a VA hospital. I've had nonprofits tell me that their funding comes from VA, so they're not going to show the film. But then I've had other veterans say like, every veteran needs to watch this film. Oh my God. That other veterans say like, this is why our suicide rate is so high, because we're all medicated. And we're told like, that's what you have to do, is go to the psychiatry and get your meds and get disability for that and all that. So I'm still working on the veterans angle. It's a hard nut to crack for sure.
So PJ may have some comments on this one too, but just a couple of quick ones. Actually, with the whole mainstream thing, I think that mainstream people, the average person, is actually pretty receptive to this message. I think the least receptive folks are the clinical folks, are the people that are the pharmaceutical are the folks that are really have an investment in this. That's been our experience. The average person, oh, this makes sense. Yeah. And the piece about being worried about or saying, you know, we can't listen to the people in your film because they're, you know, quote unquote mentally ill or whatever. I've had people approach me and say, you know, is Dan still alive? You know, despite the message of the film being, hey, we're actually okay with who we are, and some of us hear voices and we live with that, and you know, some of us don't take medication and we're doing great. Still, that's the perception, like, is Dan still alive? And I can gladly say that we're all the subjects in the film, we're doing great. Dan is doing awesome. I love to do stuff with him when I can. Jen is also doing very well. So yes, we're doing great.
So I keep coming back to this image of Lynn, of you in the room with all these mucky mucks, you know, and how they jump to this conclusion of, oh no, it's about corruption. And, you know, I would love to say to them, well, then what the fuck are you doing about it? If you're so aware that there's all this corruption and you're the industry people, what are you doing about it to change things? We all know the answer to that, by and large. So I want to say that I think this is one of the most important questions of sort of how audiences have responded in terms of, you know, these films being a bit of a pushback, right? A pushback on social narratives. You know, what's interesting, an interesting distinction between the films is that, you know, your film addresses the medication issue in the title, like it's in the lead, right? Medicating normal. It's not like it's not like you're sort of dipping your toe into the medication discussion. It's in the headline. Whereas our film, Healing Voices, I mean, this could have been about like a new age a cappella group or something. I mean, who knows, right? But obviously the medication piece is inherent to the story. And so in a lot of these events that we did, you know, one of the first questions consistently, and even before that core question of like, why did you make this movie? Somebody in the audience would inevitably say, are you anti-medication? Would be what they would say, because they wanted to know. You know, because we're pushing back against this mainstream narrative that mental illness is a disease and drugs are the cure. And many people have sort of bought this hook, line, and sinker, like we say in the voiceover of Healing Voices. And it's not a judgment. It's not about passing judgment on anyone who has bought into this narrative, because it's been pervasive. You know, the United States is one of the only countries in the world that allows direct to consumer advertising of pharmaceutical drugs. You know, this is in the context of a for-profit healthcare system that profits off of disease as opposed to wellness. And so there's this greater capitalism, context of capitalism that is an underpinning to how these stories have been, or why we've gone so far down these roads. But yeah, that was always a piece of pushback, was, you're sort of almost, it's almost like there's more, it's more like religion than science, so to speak. And I know people have bought into this belief that I have that I am this diagnosis, or that I need this medication, and we will never, we will never judge anyone deciding what's best for them. I mean, different strokes for different folks, and we all are struggling as humans to figure out where's that balance point between our health and our sanity, and what works for me and what doesn't work for my neighbor. And so, this is all about personal choice. But that idea that we have this obligation to tell both sides of the story is absolute bullshit, because the story has been controlled by very strong corporate interests for a very, very long time, and these projects are pushing back against those narratives. And that's why I use the idea of giving people permission. It's like you need to create an opening to have new conversations, or those interests just ultimately prevail. Yeah, we're proud of that. In our view, this is not about trying to tell a balanced story. It's about trying to balance out a cultural narrative, and that narrative is so still one-sided in the favor of this disease model, which I think it's one thing to call it the biological model of psychiatry, or the medical model. It's the disease model, right? And so what we're trying to tell people is you're not broken, and there's 17 paths forward if you can find the right support, and begin to think a bit differently. So signing off on that, but this is really where the rubber meets the road on these, I think.
Lynn, just sort of to your story about pointing the finger. Lynn and I had a conversation where we were pitching the film to a very a medical body and asking them to show the movie, and they actually did not say no completely. They said they only wanted to show bits and pieces of it. So I guess there were parts they wanted to remove, but when we asked why, remember, Lynn, they said because they were funded by pharmaceutical companies and they didn't want to upset their funders. So, and that's a major medical organization, but we're still crossing our fingers. Even if we can show part of the film and have a conversation, it's still progress. And then next I'll read a comment that is sort of the opposite narrative of the story that Lynn told of the whole room of psychiatrists, because we have an addiction psychiatrist in the audience who says, I've been an addiction psychiatrist for 23 years, and I'm increasingly bombarded by calls from people desperately looking for help discontinuing benzodiazepines. They all tell me their own prescriber does not know how to help them, and they don't know where to turn, and their lives are unraveling. I like your line, quote, there's a silent epidemic of people dependent on prescribed medication, end quote. There's nothing worse than unwitnessed, invalidated suffering. So she also says Medicating Normal is a beautiful, honest film that needs to be told. So Lynn and PJ and everyone else, have there been more of these type of physicians and medical people who respond in this way as well?
Yes, and thank you so much for that comment. We have addiction communities and recovery communities are beginning to be interested in our film and showing them at conferences, and it's a little bit by little bit, but I think it's one of the areas we care about deeply, because what ends up happening is someone is taken off one drug and then put on a prescribed drug to alleviate symptoms, and then what does that do? I just wanted to talk about, though, the bravery of many, many, many doctors who are still in the system. And we met them. We met a lot of them. Some of them are in our film. Someone like Anna Lemke, who can be prescribing over the years and then see that what she's doing is actually harming. And this takes great courage. And, but I think that it's the same kind of courage that Angie has in telling her story. It's saying, oh my gosh, what I'm doing may be harming a patient. Now I'm going to change. And I think that there are these kind of doctors. We screened it at, for Bedford Playhouse, and the panel is going to be up on the YouTube. There is a Yale doctor now who believes in the medication, has been prescribing for years. And now he loves the film. He's seen it 3 times, and he may be able to get us into grand rounds at Yale. And that would be incredible from our perspective, because if young residents in training can begin to see this, like what Oryx said, most of the mainstream people who see our film, at least, and I think Healing Voices too, most people see the common sense of it, they see the humanity of it. And I think that includes young residents in training. So one of our big hopes is to overcome the fact that many medical schools are given huge amounts of money from pharma, because I believe that some good doctors who have courage are going to maybe show the film or say, yes, show it to our students. And well, at least we have to try to get it into med schools. Maybe it won't be a big thing for us, but it is our hope to try to change the system from within the system as well.
Yeah, and from the community screening side, that's one of my greatest gifts, I feel, from this process is I get to see prescribers in the audience. I've done because I'm master's level now. It's like I went to get that degree to get, like, I was a double agent. You know what I mean? Like I had to get the degree so that I could get in places, and I never see my name. It doesn't say MSW after it because I don't ever want to use it. I just use it when I need to. But anyway, so I get in, I've done CE credits with addiction conferences with big groups of therapists. We have a few more therapist groups coming up. So I use it as, I can use it as training to help with that. But I have to tell you an anecdote from, like, here's an example. So there'll be prescribers in the audience. They might be friends of people that are into this material, and they invite them, or they could be their psychiatrist, and they say, hey, come, you need to watch this film, whatever. So here's an example. There was a nurse practitioner in North Carolina, and she was friend of a friend. One of the dads that I know, he sought her out to help deprescribe their son. And he invited her to one of the screenings. We went out to lunch the day before, and she was like completely naive to all of this. And like the way she was talking about her patients, it rubbed me so, oh my God, it was like just so dehumanizing. And like, oh yeah, I got those bipolar ones and those schizzy ones, you know, like the way her language just, it rubbed me the wrong way. But the next day she watched the screening, and then we went out to eat afterwards, because we always would do that. And I said, like, what did you think? And she's like, I had no idea, you know? So then a couple weeks went by, and we went for a hike. And I said, like, how did the film change you since you saw it? Like, has it changed anything in your practice? And she said, Angie, I got a new patient. He went to an emergency room. They yanked him off of one of his drugs and put him on another one. About a week later, he ended up suicidal, went back to the emergency room. They sent him to inpatient. When he got to inpatient, they changed all of his meds up again. And now I got him as he was coming out of the inpatient, whatever. And he's when he's telling me his story, I asked him, do you think all these medication changes could have contributed to you feeling suicidal? And he said, Angie, I would not have known to ask that question if I had not saw the film. Before, I would have said, that's your illness. So little tiny things like that to me is like so powerful, because I feel like you can't unsee the film. Once you see it, even if you deny it, even if you think it's total BS, even if you are one of those psychiatrists that says, I've never seen this before, none of my patients have withdrawal problems, this film is biased, this is rare, I've heard all of those things, you still can't unsee the film. That's the way I look at it. Even when they get mad, I'm glad they're mad because they saw it. I'm sitting in front of them. I look different. Just me being here and being alive and not, you know, hanging on to that mental illness language, I feel is testament. Like, you can't unsee me either. So I think it's really powerful when we do. And that's what I mean about systems change. Am I going to get the APA to watch the film? Probably not. Am I going to get a guild of American Psychological Association with all the therapists to watch it? Maybe, maybe not. But you can't unsee it when you're sitting in the audience. And just, I feel like eventually that thing is going to tip where, you know, more people understand these things than don't.
Angie, talk about the phenomenon, which I think makes huge impression on prescribers. and I think David Cohen has eloquently spoken to this. It's the phenomenon of wake up, medical system. Many people are not going to you anymore. They're going to these incredible online communities. And I don't know whether this group here knows about that, but that is a really powerful thing for any doctor to learn about and know about. Oh my God, they're not coming to me, they're going online.
Yeah, even who was that the other day? Was that Will Hall that said that? I don't remember who. No, it was Mark Horowitz. He said, he's a researcher that talks about withdrawal. He said, the consequence of the medical community not validating withdrawal problems as a real problem, the consequence of that is that patients have gone online. So now there's this layperson withdrawal community that we are the experts. And I hate to even use the word expert, but at a certain point, when you go to your doctor over and over and they invalidate you and they say like, that doesn't exist, the drug is out of your body. And you're like bringing them, literally what I did was I was wearing a t-shirt that said Washington University in St. Louis, because I was like, I want to lead with, I'm educated, because unfortunately you have to do that. And I would bring studies to the doctor and I would say, read it. Here's all the evidence. I'm in benzodiazepine withdrawal. And he was like, no, you have MS. Like totally to my face, just totally invalidated. So you can only do that so many times. And then you start Googling. And what I did was I Googled benzo withdrawal. That's all I Googled. And I was like, oh my God, that's my problem. It's right there, all this stuff. And I found those forums. Never would I have believed that I would get support from online, because that's what your doctor tells you not to do. He says, don't do Dr. Google, like don't Google anything. Don't believe what you read online. But it's kind of a beautiful, I don't know, it's scary and it's beautiful at the same time that the expertise has shifted toward the patient level. It's not in the hands of doctors. And even it, and I almost feel like it can't be either, because there's no protocol for this. There will never be a study that says, if you're on Cymbalta, Effexor, Ambien, and lorazepam, this is how you taper that, even if you're a 180-pound man versus a 230-pound woman. Like nobody can ever find that research. It's never going to happen. Everybody's an individual. So it doesn't need to sit in the hands of some expert. But the patient community are the ones that know this stuff. There's 40 years of people tapering drugs, and all that wisdom is collected. And one of the websites, I have to say it, that Nicole co-founded, is the Withdrawal Project. It's on our website. I'll put the link down there, but it's a collection of all the wisdom that people have figured out in absence of medical care.
Well, honestly, the pharmaceutical industry is bypassing doctors because they're doing the direct to consumer advertising. They're saying, you know, you have this problem, take this drug. So, but I love what you said, Angie. It's so true.
Yeah, and it's I wouldn't be afraid to say experts, because people are the experts in their own lives. I mean, that was sort of the point in what we were trying to make on screen with Healing Voices, is that, you know, Oryx was the expert, Jem was the expert, Dan was the expert, Bob Whitaker's just creating context, Bruce Levine's just creating context culturally for these stories, and that maybe we should be believing that people are the experts in their own experience. And I want to, you know, and so what I believe is that, you know, your story, Angie, your story, Oryx, I mean, your stories are an inherent threat to the dominant paradigm. And the dominant paradigm has a lot of people with a lot of skin in the game. And I think that also, you know, there's so much of this is about a lack of honest information. And so, you know, I have no problem with psychiatric drugs. I have no problem with recreational drugs. I just sort of see them on the same continuum, like we talk about in the scene in Healing Voices, where Oryx and Will are doing the workshop on coming off psych drugs. And here's I think a great sort of anecdote in terms of where this addiction industry and this mental health industry overlap. Benzodiazepine. Okay, so, you know, we have, you know, the numbers just came out recently about, you know, overdose deaths in the US in 2018 or 19, whatever the most recent year of data is. And it was 82,000 overdose deaths. It was 71,000 the year before. So obviously we're seeing an uptick with, you know, all this isolation and the things people are going through now. How many of those overdose deaths that are getting attributed to opioids are actually a result of toxicity, that are a combination of benzodiazepine, alcohol, and an opiate in somebody's system?
30 to 40.
Right. So even just that raw number of, oh, everyone's up in, I mean, yeah, sure. Yeah, there is an opioid crisis in a lot of ways. There's also a lot of other crises. You know, but we're not dealing with real-time information, right? And so if you just think about, you know, how little information people are given when they're prescribed a benzo, in terms of, you know, not just the effect, but the side effects, and the withdrawal effects and how addictive these drugs are. And are they given a college kid who walks into a mental health treatment center on campus where they're prescribing benzos? Are they telling that individual how dangerous this is to mix with alcohol? How if you're drinking and you take a little bump of heroin, how you're literally playing Russian roulette with your life? Like that information is not out there in the general public. And so we have this addiction industry that's all obsessed with these opioid deaths. And we have this mental health industry that's trying to get everyone and their mother on psychiatric drugs. And it's a conflation of a lot of bad juju. And I think part of what we're trying to break down with these, they get called anecdotes or outliers, these narratives of Oryx and Angie and these stories, we're just trying to get at the real information. And I think there's no way to get at that other than listening to people and what their experiences are in the world. So.
Okay, so maybe we can just take like 2 more questions since we've been here for about an hour. Is that good with everybody? So we were talking about the impact of the film, and there's 2 people who asked specifically what has been the impact at the VA and at the level of veteran.
I already answered that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm like, what is that noise? It's the dog.
Dog, sorry.
So Angie, there was a question specific for you then. Over what period of time did you taper your benzos? And what, if anything, did you find helpful during benzo withdrawal? For example, did you engage in community support? You talked a bit already about the online benzo support groups. Did you take medications, CBT, DBT, group therapy, anything like that?
Well, my taper experience, I'm so sorry for this dog. He's a puppy and he's so annoying. I'm sorry. Okay. No, my taper experience lasted about 10 years. In 2006, I was taken off 10 of the 17 overnight in a hospital ward. I was in the hospital for 45 days. And then I always like to share this because I don't know, I think it's important that I had this feeling like something was wrong. Like, why don't I feel good? Like, why don't I feel great gratitude? I know what that used to feel like. Why don't I feel sexual feelings? I was married before. I had a sex life. I know what that was like. There's these little inklings that would happen. So when I got off those 10, I don't think I had a clear end goal. Like, I'm going to get off of all of them. That was never in my mind. It was just like, I want to take less. I was just curious. Like, I want to see what happens when I take 6 or 5 or 4. So I was kind of taking a harm reduction approach. It wasn't until I got down to my last 2 or 3 that I really needed to have like a slower taper. Before, they were just being yanked away. Doctor would tell me to stop taking it, that kind of thing. And I would stop it on like a week or 2 weeks, maybe. So when I got down lower, the last couple were duloxetine, which is generic for Cymbalta. I couldn't stop it. A friend told me about taking the beads out. So for 2.5 years, I licked my finger, stuck it on the pill, counted the beads in my finger, and then would throw them back in the bottle. And that took me 2.5 years. And then the benzos were last. And I knew something was wrong when that doctor had prescribed me 2 benzos at the same time. I was like, wait, why would I need 2 of the same class if they work? Why would I be on 2? So I went and got a new psychiatrist. I ended up driving an hour and a half away to a different VA facility because that's how strongly I felt about it, and said, I'm on these 2. I want off. And he said, well, pick one. And so overnight, I went from 2 milligrams of clonazepam per day to 3 milligrams of lorazepam in 1 day. And then I tapered lorazepam for 2 years. And when I got to the end, I was so extremely suicidal. I was diagnosed with agitated depression, which is really akathisia. And then they tried to add lithium and Remeron, all kinds of stuff. And I just kept saying, no, I want off of this. No. And then my suicidal ideation turned into suicidal harm. And then I checked myself in the psych ward and they cold turkeyed me. So I wasn't given a slow, safe taper. I didn't even know that you needed one of those. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Totally interrupting me. Come here. And then hell broke loose 5 days later, is all I can say. So yes, I've tried all the EMDR, all the EFT, all the trauma therapy you can name. I feel like there's the neuronal damage from these drugs, okay, that you cannot predict, you cannot prepare for. There's not even language to explain the suffering that I have gone through. Now, like I said in the film, which one did it? I don't know which one did it. I don't know if it was, you know, an antipsychotic I took 20 years ago that started this whole brain change or whatever. But that's like we said, this is information that we should be told at the forefront before you take your first pill. Because I had been living this clean and sober life because I had a short stint with opiate, whatever addiction, like a long time ago, which now I see as a result of me being put on too many drugs. So I knew what addiction was. I knew to look out for it. I never craved my benzo. I never ran out early. Nothing like that ever happened. Anyway, I'm sorry, the dog is interrupting, so I can't concentrate, but there you
go. This one probably could be answered pretty quickly. Is there a recommended taper schedule for each medication that is recommended? I understand you're not doctors, but is there a guideline?
Nope. I said that earlier. It's the patients know more than anybody. A lot in the online community, the Withdrawal Project on Intercompass Initiative. All those links are on our website. Just go to medicatingnormal.com for the alternatives. And we do have a reading list, some of which have reading in general about like a person maybe should taper 5 to 10% every 2 to 4 weeks. Some people have to go slower than that. Benzos, I know people that taper 1% a week because that's how hard it is. And if they go any faster than that, they would die. So it's an individual thing. Like I said, there will never be a protocol. And if there is, you need to run, because if anybody offers you a protocol, it's just not individual.
And every doctor that we consulted with, even those who acknowledged that withdrawal was even a thing, they all had different tapering plans themselves. So there's no consistency whatsoever. It is in the medical schools, maybe a little bit, but totally not really. And I think that's one of the biggest things is we need to study withdrawal and come up with some sort of consistent guideline approach that we all can refer to. But every single drug, Angie, you told me this, has its own support group. And before you taper any of them, go to your drug support group because it exists.
Yeah, again, I want to emphasize we're not doctors. This is not doctors' advice, but as people with lived experience, I think we found some trends that are useful. And Angie mentioned, basically the slower the better has been an overall trend. But that doesn't mean to say that people have not come off successfully cold turkey. That's happened. We can't deny that's happened. It's an individual process. But in general, the slower the better. In general, you need to have some support around you. I mean, it's great to have as much support as you can. Even a doctor supporting you, yes, that can be helpful. But you don't need a doctor necessarily to be supportive, because lots of people have done it without the support of a doctor. So the more support you have around you, the better. But people have done this completely alone and even had to not tell their loved ones the truth about what they were doing because they know what the reaction would be if they did. And they come back, 2 years later and say, "Hey, Mom, guess what? I haven't been taking my meds for 2 years." And and sometimes the family still freak out. What? Well, haven't I been fine? So support timing is another thing. Like, probably not, the best idea to decide to go off your meds right after a divorce, or you've moved, or something traumatic has happened in your life. So feeling like you're in a place where you're ready for some challenge in your life, that can be important. So, but you can find this information all over the place. And I highly recommend Will Hall's book, which is The Harm Reduction Guide to Coming Off Psychiatric Drugs, as one resource.
And I want to add too that I think there are an increasing number of these support groups and online communities available to people. I mean, when we were releasing Healing Voices in 2016-17, I mean, there was a real fear, not from us, but from other people, that, wow, you're purveyors of a dangerous message here. People are going to watch this movie and they're going to stop taking their psych drugs, and all hell's going to break loose. And we didn't, if we think back to when we were generating a list of resources, I mean, there weren't as many resources then as there are now. And so I think that's a really good sign that there is sort of an organizing happening. And I think it's happening much more on the grassroots than it is institutionally. And I think it really, to me, also that's a very important point, because, we talk about this idea of peer support in Healing Voices and the value of peer support. And we show, this little animation of people meeting in Jen Constantine's basement, and that's, and that's the grassroots, right? But there's been, peer support has really struggled in the US, in particular, to integrate into the healthcare system. And so, yes, it is integrating, and it's very useful, and it's because it's sort of the antithesis of what of the harm that's done to many people in the system. But I also believe fundamentally that these supports need to exist outside of the system. That it's not about institutionalizing peer support. That peer support groups don't need permission from a healthcare system to exist. I mean, peer support groups can exist in somebody's basement. And so I believe that this, the way that, at least what I'm seeing online, a lot of these drug withdrawal or these communities are coming together. I don't think the solution is institutionalizing those communities. I think it's really a matter of these of how much support and infrastructure you can build on the grassroots, because it becomes a problem when you try to integrate into systems. And I think that's a fundamental challenge for something like peer support services and something like these types of withdrawal supports for people. And in my personal, not professional, but personal opinion, I think these things belong on the grassroots and not as part of institutional settings.
I just want to echo that it's always my fear that the withdrawal community will be kind of hijacked by professionals, and then they'll spring up clinics for withdrawal clinic, and inpatient withdrawal. And then it's like but you're still like making money off of our distress. Like that's my biggest fear, because I've seen peer support do that. Like peer support in its purest form is, hey, I've been through what you've been through. Let's talk about it. I know what it's like. And then now it's, no, I have bipolar 2 and you need to take your meds and listen to what your doctor says. Like that is not okay. That's a weapon of coercion. You know what I'm saying? Getting people to be in the system that's harming them. So I have a great fear with that. I think, like you said, that the knowledge needs to stay with our community, as radical as that is. And I stand behind it.
But I'd like to add one thing, is that we cannot insist on informed consent at the place of prescribing unless we engage the medical system in providing ways of getting people off drugs. So you cannot ask them to say, hey, all these things might happen to you, and then not give them the tool to give some kind of guidance. So
you're always more diplomatic than me. I'm sorry. I'm speaking.
No. I'm just saying
my arm.
We need our medical system.
It's true. We do need doctors to hear us, and we need to understand. But until that happens, until they're open-minded enough to listen to the patients, that's what I'm telling you right now. Like it's just a form of listening. If you ask David Cohen, if you ask Anna Lemke, how did you learn about this? I literally asked both of them that. They say, all I did was listen.
Yeah.
That's all they did was listen. So if you listen and you let the patient do their own self-directed taper, that is what we want. But until that happens, I feel like right now the safety is in the community at large.
And you're right, Lynn. I mean, it's not about either or, right? It's about sort of both and. Like you need that inside out approach is the best case scenario. I think it becomes problematic when things that are meant to exist in community are sort of forced to become institutionalized. And I think peer support in the US is a great example of that.
Yeah, and this relates to a question that we got, which is a very good question. I saw it somewhere. People are asking a lot of great questions. Is like, how do we change things? Basically, it's like, yes, we have this information, but how are we going to make change? And I agree, PJ, that we need to be everywhere in the system, outside the system. But I truly believe that it's this media thing that has potentially the most power to make change. And the reason why I think we made these films, right? We want to reach large groups of people. We've reached over 1 million people with Healing Voices. So knowledge is power. Once people have the knowledge, then it's not going to be the system that changes itself. The system is very happy to keep going and keep making money, and it's going to be you. It's going to be the audience. It's going to be the average person that makes that difference. And we're getting the word out, and that's great. but ultimately it's going to be people who care enough about what's happening to force change to happen.
Such a good point. Just that if every person in this audience did one thing to help change this, what would that look like? Like the ripple effect of that.
Yeah. I just wanted to call out to, I'm going to say my final thing, which is Angie always says, don't believe anything that any of us are saying. And that on Oryx's note, educate yourself, read the books that need to be read, read all of them, read the ones you don't agree with, and question those ads that come on TV, and just start to do what we all did because it was close to us, but it is out there. It's really important to do. Will Hall, who worked with you guys, has an amazing, he did the harm reduction guide, but before that, I remember there are, I don't know, 50 interviews, maybe more, on his Madness radio show that are incredible insights into all of this, different aspects of what mental health is about, of healing, and just start listening to Madness radio. There's so many things like that, books that you haven't even heard of. There's just so much to learn, and that, Oryx, you're right. We all just have to educate ourselves, and our grassroots begging for this information will change the system if we all become more informed.
Okay, so now we're at the point where I guess we can all just go around if anybody has any closing thoughts. There were some questions in the chat as to if people missed seeing Healing Voices, if they can continue to see it. Some people asking about Medicating Normal, if it's out, if they can share it with other people in any way, etc. So who would like to go first?
I'm happy to jump in. So what I would say in terms of closing thoughts, and Healing Voices is available on Amazon Prime in the US and in the UK. Our website at the moment we need to get a website back up. We don't have an official project website at the moment, but the film is on IMDb. It's on Amazon Prime, and what I would encourage for both films, what everyone in the audience to do in terms of an action, is go on Twitter, go on Facebook. Both films are on these social media profiles, and respond to the film. Say you attended this event. Say you express what you thought, for better or for worse. But I mean, continuing to talk about these things across social media profiles is a very, very meaningful way for us to sort of build the evidence, to build our case, and that's also how new people are going to discover these projects. So that's my call to action for the audience, is to use your personal profiles across social media platforms to let people know that these films exist, and that they can access them. And so I would just say thank you for coming, and just encourage you all to not to believe everything you read, and and when you're consuming your media out there, to be critical, because there are no universal truths, and I hope these films collectively prove that.
Medicating Normal is available right now. It's being distributed to universities and schools through a company called Good Docs. So we're excited about that the young students and residents may have a chance to see it. It's being distributed globally by a company called Sideways Films for broadcast internationally. But for the moment here in the US, we are doing what PJ recommends, and that is we're trying our hardest to continue with our community screenings, organized in large part by Angie and Nicole, with panels. So we ask all of you guys, if you know of a group of people or a place or an organization who would be interested in either of these films, let us all know, because we want to continue the community screenings. So our email is medicatingnormal@gmail.com, and our website is medicatingnormal.com. And we really, really value your questions. We didn't even get to them. I know there's so many good questions, and what are we going to do about that, you guys? Because if you really want to ask those questions, email us, and we all will take the time to answer those questions. So thank you so much for being here.
Oryx?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what everybody else said. And anything that we can do to support the rollout of Medicating Normal, we're happy to do. And that's a great action that we can all do, is just spread the word about this new film, powerful film. I think very well presented and documented. I love the arguments that are made, especially with the pharmaceutical industry. I think it complements Healing Voices very well. So let's get this movie out there. Send it to your politicians. So have meetings with your representatives, your senators. Say, hey, look, here, what are you doing about this? There's so much we can do with this. So have that as what you can do.
And I'll just go last that, yeah, I think what you're asking is if you missed Healing Voices or you caught the tail end or you started watching Healing Voices at 1 instead of being with Medicating Normal, you do have a link in your email of the Healing Voices movie. And PJ so graciously said he'll leave it up for, maybe, I don't know, a week or something. So hurry up and catch it. Please don't share it just because you paid for the ticket. And if you missed Medicating Normal, I have a couple emails I saw during the panel. So just email me if you missed the beginning and I'll send it over for, 24 hours or so. But the same, what PJ said, please interact with me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm not so good on Instagram, but we do a lot of thoughtful, like I read a lot of articles and post articles that are kind of critically thinking on this whole subject. So just read them, follow us. Our YouTube channel has over 130 videos. Some are panels and some are just short clips that you can share on social media. You can even send to a doctor if you want, Anna Lemke saying benzodiazepine withdrawal problems. There's lots of really good videos like that. So I just want to say thank you for all for coming. We can all do something. So whatever that something is, just even if it's one small act of kindness, do that too. Thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Thanks, Healing Voices and Medicating Normal and our audience for coming today. And everybody take good care.
Thank you,
Thank you.
guys.